The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles sat in his private study, staring at the documents spread across his mahogany desk. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did that October evening in 2024. For months, he had been wrestling with a decision that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy, a choice so unprecedented that even his closest advisors had tried to dissuade him from considering it. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, knocked softly on the door before entering. Her usually bright demeanor seemed subdued as she approached the desk where her father-in-law sat deep in contemplation. She had been summoned to this private meeting, though she had no idea why. The relationship between Charles and Kate had always been cordial, respectful, but tonight there was something different in the air, an electricity that made her feel uneasy. "Your Majesty," she said softly, offering a slight curtsy despite their family relationship. Charles looked up, his weathered face bearing the lines of a man who had carried responsibility his entire life. At 75, he had waited longer than any heir in British history to assume the throne, and now, just 2 years into his reign, he was contemplating something that would change everything. "Kate, please sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "We need to talk about something very important, something that will affect not just our family, but the entire Commonwealth." His voice carried a gravity that made Kate's heart skip a beat. In the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of London traffic, the city continuing its rhythm, while inside these palace walls, history was about to be written. The Princess of Wales smoothed her navy dress as she settled into the chair, her hands folding neatly in her lap. She had learned over the years to maintain her composure in any situation, but the intensity in Charles's eyes was unsettling. Behind him, portraits of previous monarchs seemed to watch from their gilded frames, silent witnesses to conversations that had shaped the nation for centuries. "Kate, you've been part of this family for over a decade now," Charles began, his fingers drumming slightly on the desk. "You've shown dedication, grace, and an understanding of duty that has impressed everyone, including myself." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What I'm about to discuss with you has never been done in the history of our monarchy, but these are unprecedented times, and sometimes unprecedented times call for unprecedented decisions." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and Kate found herself focusing on that sound as Charles continued to speak. She had no idea where this conversation was heading, but something in his tone told her that her life was about to change dramatically. In the hallways outside, she could hear the soft footsteps of palace staff going about their evening duties, unaware that their future queen consort was about to receive news that would alter the course of British history. "I've been thinking about the future of our monarchy," Charles continued, his voice growing more resolute, "about what it means to serve the people, about legacy, and about who is best positioned to lead this institution into the next era." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. "William is a good man, a devoted son, and he will make an excellent king one day. But you, Kate, you have something special, something that connects with the people in a way that's rare and precious." Kate's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure she was understanding correctly, but the implication of his words was beginning to dawn on her. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I follow," she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 o'clock, marking the moment when her understanding of her future began to shift. Charles turned back to face her, his expression both serious and surprisingly gentle. "Kate, I want you to know that this decision hasn't been made lightly. I've consulted with constitutional experts, with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and, yes, I've spoken with William." At the mention of her husband's name, Kate's eyes widened. "What I'm about to propose will require your consent, your complete understanding of what it means, and your absolute commitment." The silence in the room was deafening. Kate could hear her own heartbeat as she waited for Charles to continue. Outside, the London Eye was beginning its evening illumination, a sight that had always brought her comfort. But Tonight, even that familiar landmark seemed distant and surreal. I am considering naming you as my successor to the throne, Charles said finally, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Not William, but you, Catherine. You would become Queen Catherine I, sovereign in your own right, not merely a consort. The words seemed to echo in the ornate room, bouncing off the high ceilings and settling into every corner. Kate felt the world tilt on its axis. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she had just heard. In over 1,000 years of British monarchy, no king had ever voluntarily bypassed his heir in favor of a daughter-in-law. The constitutional implications alone were staggering, but beyond that, the personal ramifications for her family, for William, for their children, were almost incomprehensible. I know this comes as a shock, Charles continued, returning to his seat. It certainly wasn't something I ever imagined I would consider when I first became king. But over the past 2 years, I've watched how the people respond to you, how you handle every situation with such grace and wisdom. You have a natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life, something that can't be taught or manufactured. Kate's mind raced as she tried to find her voice. But William, she began, thinking of her husband, the man who had been raised his entire life knowing he would one day be king. How does he feel about this? What did he say when you spoke to him? Charles's expression softened slightly. William surprised me, actually. After the initial shock, he said something that made me realize I was right to consider this path. He said that he had always known his greatest strength wasn't in being king himself, but in recognizing and supporting the person who should be. He said you had the heart, the mind, and the spirit that the monarchy needs for the challenges ahead. The room fell silent again as Kate absorbed this information. She thought about William, about the countless conversations they'd had about their future roles, about the weight of responsibility that had always seemed to settle so heavily on his shoulders. Had he really been relieved by his father's proposal? Or was this his way of supporting what he saw as an inevitable decision? The constitutional process would be complex, Charles explained, pulling out a thick folder from his desk drawer. We would need to change the succession laws, which would require the consent of all the Commonwealth realms. It's not impossible. We've changed succession laws before, but this would be far more significant. The process could take months, possibly years, but I believe it's the right thing to do for the future of our institution. Kate stood up and walked to the window where Charles had been standing moments before. The city stretched out below her, millions of people living their lives, unaware that the woman they had watched grow from a commoner into a beloved royal was being offered the ultimate responsibility. She thought about her children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and how this decision would affect their futures. George had been born knowing he would one day be king, but now that certainty was being questioned. What about the children? She asked, her voice tight with emotion. George has been raised knowing he's third in line to the throne. Charlotte and Louis understand their roles in the family. How do we explain to them that everything they've been taught about their futures might change? Charles joined her at the window. The children would adjust, Kate. Children are remarkably resilient, and they would still be part of the royal family, still have important roles to play. But, yes, it would mean George's path would be different. Instead of being destined for the throne, he would have the freedom to choose his own way, to serve the crown in whatever capacity calls to him. The implications continued to unfold in Kate's mind like a complex puzzle. She thought about the public reaction, about the media frenzy that would surely follow such an announcement. She thought about the traditionalists who would be outraged, and the progressives who might see it as a bold step forward for the monarchy. Most of all, she thought about the enormous responsibility of leading not just a nation, but an entire commonwealth of countries and territories around the world. Why me? She asked finally, turning to face Charles directly. I mean, I understand what you've said about connecting with people, but there must be more to it than that. This is the most radical decision a British monarch has made in centuries. There has to be a deeper reason. Charles was quiet for a long moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had rarely heard from him. Kate, I've spent my entire life preparing to be king, 73 years waiting for the moment when I would finally assume the throne. And in these 2 years since my mother's death, I've realized something that perhaps I should have understood long ago." He moved away from the window and sat down heavily in his chair. Being king isn't just about being born into the right family or being next in line. It's about having the capacity to serve, to lead, to inspire. It's about understanding the people you serve and being able to speak to their hopes and fears. My mother had that gift naturally. She understood instinctively what the country needed from her in any given moment. Kate returned to her chair, sensing that Charles was about to reveal something deeply personal. The rain had stopped, and the silence outside made his words seem even more significant. "I've tried to be the king my mother would have wanted me to be," he continued. "But I'm 75 years old, Kate. I came to this role at an age when most people are well into retirement. The world is changing so rapidly, and the challenges facing the monarchy in the 21st century require someone who can not only understand those changes, but help guide the institution through them." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers directly. "When I watch you at public engagements, when I see how naturally you interact with people, how you seem to instinctively know what to say and do in every situation, I see the future of this monarchy. Not in William, though he's a good man, not in myself, though I'll continue to serve as long as I'm able, but in you." The weight of his words settled on Kate like a heavy cloak. She had never sought this level of responsibility, had never imagined that her journey from a middle-class girl from Berkshire to the royal family would lead to this moment. When she had married William, she had understood that she would one day be queen consort, supporting her husband in his role as king. But this was entirely different. This was about being the sovereign herself, being the head of state, being the person to whom millions of people would look for leadership and guidance. "I need time to think about this," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "This isn't just about me. It affects William, it affects our children, it affects the entire royal family. I can't make this decision alone." Charles nodded understandingly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But, Kate, I want you to know that I wouldn't be making this offer if I didn't believe, with every fiber of my being, that you are the right person for this role. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it has been able to evolve, to adapt to changing times while maintaining its essential character. This decision would be part of that evolution." As Kate prepared to leave the study, Charles stood and walked around the desk to her. "There's something else you should know," he said softly. "Your parents, your sister Pippa, they know about this conversation. I felt it was important that they understand what we were discussing. Their reaction, well, let's just say they're very proud, but also very concerned about what this would mean for you and for the family." Kate felt a new wave of emotion wash over her. The thought that her parents already knew about this possibility added another layer of reality to the situation. She could imagine her mother's excitement mixed with worry, her father's quiet pride tempered by concern for the enormous burden this would place on his daughter. "They support whatever decision you make," Charles added. "But they wanted you to know that they believe you have the strength and the character to handle whatever path you choose." As Kate walked through the palace corridors toward her apartment, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors, she felt as if she were moving through a dream. The familiar surroundings seemed different somehow, as if she were seeing them through new eyes. The portraits of past monarchs that lined the walls seemed to watch her with particular interest, as if they too were curious about this unprecedented moment in royal history. In her apartment, William was waiting for her, sitting in their favorite reading chair with a book in his hands, though she could tell he wasn't actually reading. He looked up as she entered, his expression a mixture of anticipation and concern. They had been married long enough that he could read her emotions instantly, and he could see the weight of the conversation she had just written across her face. "How do you feel?" he asked simply, setting his book aside and opening his arms to her. She collapsed into his embrace, feeling the safety and comfort that only he could provide. For a moment, they just held each other in silence, both understanding that their lives had just reached a crossroads that would determine not only their future, but the future of the monarchy itself. "I'm terrified," Kate admitted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "But I'm also honored." Confused? "I don't even know how to process what just happened." William stroked her hair gently, the way he had done countless times over the years when she was stressed or overwhelmed. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," he said softly. "This is bigger than either of us imagined, but we'll figure out together whatever we decide." His voice carried the same steady reassurance that had attracted her to him all those years ago at university, the quality that had made her fall in love with a future king while trying to forget that he was a future king. As they sat together in the quiet of their apartment, Kate realized that this moment would be remembered as the beginning of either the most significant change in British royal history or the most carefully guarded secret the monarchy had ever kept. Either way, her life would never be the same. The girl from Berkshire who had captured Prince's heart was now being asked to become something no woman in British history had ever been. A queen in her own right, chosen not by birth but by merit, not by tradition but by the recognition of her unique ability to lead. Outside their window, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that within the walls of the palace, history was quietly being written. The choice that would stun everyone was still unmade, but the conversation that would change everything had begun. In the days to come, Kate would need to search her heart, consult her family, and decide whether she was ready to accept the greatest responsibility her country could offer. The crown was being offered to her not as an inheritance, but as a calling, and the weight of that distinction would shape every moment of her decision-making process. The evening ended with Kate and William talking late into the night, exploring every angle of this extraordinary situation, knowing that whatever choice they made would echo through the ages and determine not just their own destiny, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The following morning brought no relief from the weight of the previous evening's revelation. Kate woke before dawn, her mind immediately flooding with memories of the conversation with King Charles. Beside her, William slept peacefully, but she could see the tension even in his sleeping face. They had talked until nearly 3 in the morning, exploring every possible angle of the situation, but no amount of discussion could prepare them for the reality of what lay ahead. She slipped quietly from their bed and made her way to the kitchen, needing the familiar ritual of making tea to ground herself in something normal. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she stared out at the palace gardens, where the early morning mist was just beginning to lift. The autumn flowers were still blooming, their colors muted in the soft light, and she found herself wondering if she would see them differently next year, if she would still be living in this apartment, or if everything would have changed. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced William's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing the old university sweatshirt that she had always loved on him. In moments like this, it was easy to forget that he was second in line to the throne, easy to remember the young man she had fallen in love with who used to make her breakfast in their tiny student flat. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, joining her by the window. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence, as she had done for over a decade. Outside, the palace gardeners were beginning their morning work, tending to the beds that would soon be dormant for winter. "I keep thinking about what this means for George," Kate said softly. "He's only 11, but he's already so aware of his position, so conscious of what's expected of him. How do we tell him that everything he's been taught about his future might change?" William was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "Maybe we don't tell him anything yet," he said finally. "Maybe we wait until we've made our decision, until we know for certain what path we're taking. He's still young enough that a few more months won't make a difference to his understanding of the world." The kettle began to whistle, and Kate moved to make their tea, grateful for the simple task. As she prepared their breakfast, William sat at the small table where they had shared so many quiet mornings over the years. This kitchen had been their refuge, the place where they could be just William and Kate, where the weight of their public roles could be set aside for a few precious hours. "Your father called last night," William said as she joined him at the table. "After you fell asleep. We want to make sure we understood that there's no pressure, no timeline we have to follow. He said the decision has to come from us, from what we believe is right for the family and for the country." Kate wrapped her hands around her warm mug, taking comfort in the familiar weight of it. But there is pressure, isn't there? Even if he doesn't mean to put it on us, the very fact that he's made this offer creates pressure. People will start to wonder why it's taking so long to decide what we're considering. The morning sun was beginning to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. In a few hours, they would need to resume their public roles, attending engagements, and fulfilling their duties as if this earth-shattering conversation had never happened. Kate wondered how she would manage to smile and make small talk when her entire world had been turned upside down. "I've been thinking about something," William said, his voice careful and measured, "about what this decision means for us for a marriage. If you accept Father's offer, you would be the sovereign. I will be what? A consort? A supportive husband? I'm not sure there's even a precedent for what my role would be." This was the question that had kept Kate awake for much of the night. Throughout history, queens consort had supported their husbands, but there had never been a king consort to a reigning queen who hadn't inherited the throne by birth. The constitutional and ceremonial implications were complex enough, but the personal implications were even more challenging to navigate. "Would you be able to handle that?" Kate asked, meeting his eyes directly. "I know how much you've prepared for kingship, how much of your identity is tied to that future role. If I accept this offer, I would be asking you to step back from everything you've trained for your entire life." William reached across the table and took her hand. "Kate, I need you to understand something. Yes, I was raised to be king. Yes, I've spent my whole life preparing for that role. But I was also raised to serve, to put the good of the country and the Commonwealth above my own desires. If Father believes you would be a better sovereign than I would be, then supporting that decision would be another form of service." His words were generous, but Kate could see the struggle in his eyes. This wasn't easy for him, and she suspected it was even more difficult than he was admitting. The heir to the throne voluntarily stepping aside for his wife was unprecedented, and the personal cost of such a decision would be enormous. "But what about your own dreams, your own sense of purpose?" she pressed. "You've always been so passionate about the causes you support, about the vision you have for modernizing the monarchy. Would you really be content to step back from all of that?" William was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea. When he looked up, his expression was both sad and resolved. "I think I would find new purpose, new ways to serve. Maybe this is exactly what the monarchy needs, Kate. Maybe breaking with tradition, showing that we can adapt and change when necessary, is more important than maintaining the status quo." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's voices in the hallway. George, Charlotte, and Louis were awake and looking for their parents, ready to start another day of their carefully structured lives. Kate felt a pang of guilt as she realized how their decision would affect not just George's future, but Charlotte and Louis as well. All three children would need to understand and adapt to whatever choice their parents made. "Mummy, Daddy, can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Charlotte asked as she bounded into the kitchen, her hair still messy from sleep. At 9 years old, she was beginning to develop her own strong personality, and Kate often saw glimpses of the confident young woman she would become. "Of course, darling," Kate said, pushing aside her heavy thoughts to focus on her daughter. "Why don't you wake up George and Louis while I get everything ready?" As Charlotte ran off to collect her brothers, Kate found herself studying William's face, looking for any signs of regret or resentment about their conversation. Louis appeared next, still wearing his pajamas and carrying his favorite stuffed dog. At 6, he was the baby of the family, still young enough to be unaware of the complexities of their royal life. He climbed onto William's lap, and Kate watched as her husband's face softened with pure love. Whatever decision they made, she knew it would be guided by their desire to protect and nurture their children. George was the last to appear, already dressed for the day in his school uniform. Even at 11, he carried himself with the unconscious dignity that came from being third in line to the throne. He had been born into a life of duty and service, and Kate could see that awareness in the way he interacted with the world around him. The question of whether that burden would remain his destiny now hung over everything. As they prepared breakfast together as a family, Kate tried to imagine how different this scene might be in a year's time. Would they still be living in their apartment at Kensington Palace, or would they have moved to Buckingham Palace? Would George still be attending his current school, or would his education need to change to reflect his new position in the line of succession? The questions seemed endless, each one leading to a dozen more. After breakfast, as William helped the children get ready for school, Kate found herself alone with her thoughts again. She walked to their sitting room and looked at the family photographs that lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of their wedding day, of the children's christenings, of family holidays, and official engagements. In every image, she saw the progression of their life together, the gradual transformation from a young couple in love to a family dedicated to service. Her phone rang, interrupting her reverie. The caller ID showed her mother's name, and Kate felt both relief and apprehension. Carol Middleton had been her anchor throughout her transition into royal life, offering practical advice and emotional support whenever it was needed. If anyone could help her navigate this unprecedented situation, it would be her mother. "Darling, how are you feeling this morning?" Carol's voice was warm, but concerned. It was clear that she had been thinking about their conversation all night as well. "Overwhelmed," Kate admitted, settling into her favorite chair. "I keep trying to imagine what it would actually mean, what daily life would be like, and I can't wrap my head around it. Being queen consort is one thing, but being the sovereign? It's almost incomprehensible." Carol was quiet for a moment before responding. "Kate, your father and I have been talking about this all night. We want you to know that whatever you decide, we'll support you completely. But we also want you to know that we believe you have everything it takes to handle this responsibility. We've watched you grow into your role over the past 13 years, and we've seen how naturally leadership comes to you." The conversation with her mother helped clarify some of Kate's thoughts, but it also raised new concerns. Her parents had built a successful business from nothing, had worked hard to provide opportunities for their children, and had adapted remarkably well to having a daughter marry into the royal family. But this decision would elevate their status in ways they had never anticipated, bringing new levels of scrutiny and pressure. "What about Pippa and James?" Kate asked, referring to her siblings. "How would this affect them? They've already had to deal with so much attention because of my marriage to William." "They're both supportive," Carol assured her. "Pippa said something last night that I think you should hear. She said that she had always been proud of having a sister who became a princess, but if you accept this offer, she would be proud of having a sister who became a queen because she earned it, not because she inherited it." After ending the call with her mother, Kate felt both more confident and more uncertain than before. The support of her family was crucial, but it also added to the weight of responsibility she felt. This decision wouldn't just affect her immediate family. It would impact everyone connected to them, from her parents and siblings to William's family to the staff who worked for them. The morning passed in a blur of ordinary activities that felt anything but ordinary. Kate reviewed her schedule for the coming weeks, attended a video conference about one of her charitable patronages, and helped Charlotte with a school project about British history. The irony of helping her daughter learn about past monarchs while contemplating her own potential role as a future sovereign was not lost on her. In the afternoon, she met with Amanda Thirsk, her private secretary, to discuss upcoming engagements. Amanda had been with the royal family for over a decade and had become not just an assistant, but a trusted advisor. As they reviewed Kate's calendar, Amanda seemed to sense that something significant was weighing on the princess's mind. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you seem somewhat distracted today," Amanda said carefully. "Is there anything I can do to help, or anything about the upcoming schedule that's concerning you?" Kate looked at the woman who had helped organize her life for the past several years, who knew her preferences and priorities better than almost anyone outside her family. Amanda had been present for many of the most significant moments of Kate's royal life, from major state occasions to quiet family milestones. If Kate accepted Charles's offer, Amanda would need to adapt to supporting a queen rather than a princess. "Actually, "Amanda, there is something," Kate said slowly. "It's quite sensitive, and I need your discretion above all else." Amanda nodded, her expression growing serious. She had maintained confidentiality about countless royal matters over the years and understood the importance of absolute discretion. "I'm considering a significant change in my role within the family," Kate continued carefully. "It would affect not just my duties, but the entire structure of how we operate. I can't give you specifics yet, but I want you to start thinking about what it would mean if my responsibilities were to increase substantially." Amanda was too experienced to show surprise, but Kate could see the curiosity in her eyes. "Of course, ma'am. Should I begin researching historical precedents for expanded royal duties, or would you prefer me to focus on current operational considerations?" "Both, actually," Kate replied. "And, Amanda, this conversation stays between us for now. No one else on the staff should know we're discussing this." Amanda nodded her understanding, and Kate felt grateful for having someone so competent and trustworthy in her corner. That evening, William returned from his own engagements looking as thoughtful as Kate felt. They had dinner with the children, helped with homework, and went through the familiar routine of bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. It wasn't until the children were asleep that they could finally return to the conversation that had dominated both their thoughts all day. "I spoke with my grandmother today," William said as they settled in their sitting room. He was referring to Queen Elizabeth II, though she had passed away 2 years earlier. Kate realized he meant he had visited her grave at Windsor, something he did when he needed guidance or comfort. What would she have thought about all this? Kate asked softly. She had developed a deep respect and affection for the late Queen during their years together, and Elizabeth's opinions still mattered enormously to both of them. "I think she would have been surprised," William said honestly. "But I also think she would have understood Father's reasoning. She was always practical about the monarchy's survival, always willing to adapt when necessary. Remember how she handled the abdication crisis with her uncle, how she navigated the changing role of women in society throughout her reign. They talked about the late Queen's legacy, about the changes she had overseen during her 70 years on the throne, about the precedent she had set for putting duty above personal preference. As the evening wore on, Kate began to see parallels between Elizabeth's lifelong commitment to service and the choice that now lay before her. "There's something else we need to consider," William said as they prepared for bed. "If we decide to accept Father's offer, we'll need to think about timing. This isn't something that can be announced suddenly. There will need to be months of preparation, constitutional reviews, discussions with Parliament, and the Commonwealth governments." Kate nodded, understanding that the complexity of the decision extended far beyond their personal choice. This would require careful orchestration, diplomatic consultation, and probably years of gradual transition. The monarchy couldn't afford to appear unstable or uncertain, which meant any change would need to be presented as a thoughtful evolution rather than a dramatic departure from tradition. As she lay in bed that night, Kate found herself thinking about all the women who had shaped British history, from Queen Elizabeth I to Queen Victoria to Elizabeth II. Each had faced challenges that required them to redefine what it meant to be a female sovereign. If she accepted Charles's offer, she would be adding her own chapter to that story, but under circumstances that no previous queen had ever faced. The choice that would stun everyone was still unmade, but with each passing hour, Kate was beginning to understand both the magnitude of what was being offered to her and the profound responsibility it would entail. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new considerations, and new steps toward a decision that would reshape not just her own future, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The girl from Berkshire who had captured a prince's heart was discovering that she might be destined for something far greater than she had ever imagined. 3 weeks had passed since that pivotal evening in King Charles's study, and Kate found herself no closer to a decision. If anything, the additional time had only served to illuminate just how complex and far-reaching the implications of accepting the crown would be. Every conversation, every engagement, every quiet moment with her family had been filtered through the lens of this momentous choice. The November morning was crisp and clear as Kate made her way through the corridors of Clarence House for a meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Justin Welby had requested to speak with her privately, understanding that any decision about the succession would require not just constitutional consideration, but spiritual guidance as well. The monarchy and the Church of England had been intertwined for centuries, and the sovereign's role as defender of the faith was among the most sacred duties of the crown. Archbishop Welby greeted her in his study, a warm room filled with theological books and comfortable chairs that invited honest conversation. At 74, he had served as archbishop for over a decade and had officiated at both William and Kate's wedding and the coronation of King Charles. His presence was both comforting and sobering, reminding Kate that this decision had implications that reached far beyond politics and protocol. "Catherine, thank you for coming," the archbishop said, gesturing for her to take a seat near the fireplace. "I hope you understand that this conversation is completely confidential and that my role is simply to help you explore all aspects of this remarkable situation from a spiritual perspective." Kate settled into the chair, grateful for the warmth of the fire and the archbishop's calming presence. Over the years, she had developed a deep faith that had sustained her through the challenges of royal life, but this decision was testing that faith in ways she had never experienced. "Your Grace, I find myself struggling with the spiritual dimension of this choice," Kate began honestly. "On one hand, I feel called to serve, to use whatever gifts I might have for the benefit of others. On the other hand, accepting this responsibility feels almost presumptuous, as if I'm claiming a role that wasn't meant for me." The archbishop nodded thoughtfully. "The concept of calling is central to understanding this situation, Catherine. Throughout history, many of our greatest leaders have been those who didn't seek power for its own sake, but who felt compelled to serve when a need arose. Your hesitation, your concern about presumption, actually suggests to me that you understand the sacred nature of what's being offered to you." They talked for over an hour about duty, service, and the weight of responsibility. The archbishop shared stories of previous monarchs who had faced difficult decisions, who had been called to serve in ways they hadn't expected. He spoke about Queen Elizabeth I, who had never wanted to marry because she felt called to serve England as a virgin queen, and Queen Victoria, who had been reluctant to take on the enormous responsibility of empire at such a young age. "What troubles me most," Kate confessed, "is the impact on William. He spent his entire life preparing to be king. How can I ask him to step aside, even if he says he supports the decision?" Archbishop Welby leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Catherine, I've known William since he was a child, and I've watched him grow into a man of deep faith and character. His willingness to support what he believes is best for the monarchy, even at personal cost, is actually one of his greatest strengths as a future leader. Whether he serves as king or as the supportive husband of a queen, his contributions will be significant." The conversation left Kate with much to contemplate, but it also provided a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. The spiritual dimension of her potential role was becoming clearer, and she was beginning to understand that accepting this responsibility might actually be an act of faith rather than presumption. That afternoon, Kate attended a long-planned engagement at a children's hospital in London. As she walked through the wards, spending time with young patients and their families, she was struck by how naturally these interactions came to her. The formal protocols of royal visits had become second nature over the years, but more importantly, she found genuine joy and purpose in these moments of human connection. "Your Royal Highness, my daughter has been so excited about your visit," said the mother of a 7-year-old girl who was recovering from surgery. "She's been practicing her curtsy for days, though she can barely walk right now." Kate knelt beside the little girl's bed, her formal navy dress pooling around her as she came down to the child's eye level. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm so glad to meet you. I heard you're very brave and that you're helping the doctors learn how to take better care of other children who might need the same operation you had." The little girl beamed despite her obvious discomfort, and her mother's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. These were the moments that reminded Kate why she had embraced royal life in the first place, why she had been willing to give up her privacy and freedom for a life of service. If she accepted King Charles's offer, there would be many more opportunities for these connections, but also much greater responsibility for the welfare of millions of people across the Commonwealth. During the car ride back to Kensington Palace, Kate found herself reflecting on the day's events. Her private secretary, Amanda, had accompanied her to the hospital and had observed the princess's interactions with her usual professional attention. As they settled into the comfortable rear seats of the official car, Amanda made an observation that surprised Kate. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you seem particularly engaged today. There was something different about your interactions with the families, something even more focused and purposeful than usual." Kate looked out the window at the London streets passing by, thinking about Amanda's words. "I suppose I was thinking about legacy today, about what it means to make a real difference in people's lives. Sometimes the formal aspects of our work can feel distant from the actual impact we're having." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "Ma'am, in my years of working with the royal family, I've observed that the most effective members are those who never lose sight of the human dimension of their role. Titles and protocols matter, but they're only meaningful if they enable genuine service." That evening, Kate joined William for dinner with King Charles and Queen Camilla at Buckingham Palace. It was the first time the four of them had been together since the initial conversation about the succession, and the atmosphere was noticeably different. Charles seemed more relaxed, as if having broached the subject had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Camilla, who had been informed about the situation, was supportive but clearly concerned about the implications for the entire family. "Kate, my dear, I hope you know that whatever you decide, you have my complete support," Camilla said as they moved to the drawing room after dinner. "This isn't a decision that anyone should have to make, but if anyone is capable of handling it with grace and wisdom, it's you." The conversation that evening was wide-ranging, touching on constitutional law, historical precedent, and family dynamics. Charles had clearly been doing extensive research and consultation since their first discussion, and he was able to address many of the practical questions that had been troubling Kate. "The constitutional process will be complex, but not impossible," he explained. "We would need to work with Parliament to modify the succession laws, and we would need the consent of all the Commonwealth realms. Some countries might choose to become republics rather than accept such a significant change, but others might see it as evidence that the monarchy can evolve with the times." William had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, and Kate could sense that he was still processing the emotional aspects of the situation. When Charles and Camilla excused themselves for an early evening, William and Kate remained in the drawing room, surrounded by centuries of royal history that seemed to press down on them with particular weight. "How are you really feeling about all this?" Kate asked him directly. They had talked around the subject for weeks, but she sensed that William hadn't fully expressed his deepest feelings about potentially stepping aside. William was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire that crackled in the ornate fireplace. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that he rarely allowed others to see. "I'm proud of you, Kate. Incredibly proud that my father sees in you what I've always seen. But I won't lie and say it's easy to contemplate stepping back from something I've been preparing for my entire life." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But I've also realized something over these past few weeks. My whole life, I've felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to be worthy of the crown that would someday be mine. When I think about you wearing that crown instead, I feel relief more than loss. Relief that the monarchy would be in such capable hands. Relief that I could find new ways to serve without carrying that ultimate responsibility." Kate reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers as she had done countless times over their years together. "But what about your own dreams, your own vision for what you could accomplish as king?" "My vision was always about service, about using the position to make a positive difference," William replied. "If you accept this role, I would still be able to pursue those goals, just in a different capacity. Maybe as your partner and consort, I could actually be more effective, more focused on specific causes without the broader constitutional responsibilities. Their conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock on the door. A palace aide informed them that the Prime Minister had arrived for a previously scheduled private meeting with King Charles. Kate realized that the political implications of this decision were also being carefully considered, that Charles was ensuring all stakeholders understood what was being contemplated. As they prepared to leave Buckingham Palace, Kate found herself walking slowly through the staterooms, trying to imagine herself not just visiting these historic spaces, but living in them, working in them, hosting world leaders, and conducting the business of state within these walls. The weight of history was palpable, from the portraits of previous monarchs to the artifacts that represented centuries of British and Commonwealth history. The following week brought a series of private meetings that helped Kate understand the full scope of what accepting the crown would entail. She met with constitutional experts who explained the legal process that would be required to change the succession. She consulted with former private secretaries to the Queen who helped her understand the daily realities of sovereign duties. She even had a lengthy conversation with the Governor-General of Canada, who explained how the Commonwealth realms would need to be consulted about such a significant change. Each meeting added new layers of complexity to the decision, but also helped Kate envision what her reign might look like. She began to see how her existing interests and expertise could be expanded into areas of genuine impact. Her work with early childhood development could become a cornerstone of domestic policy. Her understanding of modern communication could help the monarchy connect with younger generations. Her natural empathy and emotional intelligence could be valuable assets in the increasingly complex world of international diplomacy. Perhaps most importantly, she began to understand that accepting this role wouldn't mean abandoning who she was, but rather expanding her capacity to serve. The girl from Berkshire who had studied art history and worked briefly in her family's business before marrying into the royal family had developed skills and insights that could be valuable to the nation and the Commonwealth. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reading briefing materials about constitutional monarchy, Kate realized that her perspective on the decision had fundamentally shifted. Instead of seeing the crown as something being offered to her that she might not deserve, she was beginning to see it as a responsibility that she might be uniquely positioned to fulfill. The choice was no longer about whether she was worthy of the role, but about whether the role needed what she could bring to it. Her phone rang, displaying her sister Pippa's name. Since learning about the situation, Pippa had been a source of both support and practical advice, helping Kate think through the implications for their entire family. "Kate, I've been thinking about something," Pippa said without preamble. "Do you remember when we were children, and you always insisted on being the one to organize our games, to make sure everyone was included and having fun? Even then, you had this natural ability to bring people together, to make everyone feel valued." Kate smiled, remembering those childhood days when leadership had felt natural and uncomplicated. "What's your point, Pip?" "My point is that you've always been a leader, Kate. You just never thought of yourself that way because you're so focused on serving others. Maybe it's time to recognize that accepting this crown wouldn't be about gaining power, but about having a larger platform for the service you're already providing." As November drew to a close, Kate found herself approaching a decision. The conversations, the consultations, the sleepless nights of contemplation had all led to a growing clarity about what she believed was right for the monarchy and for the country. The choice that had initially seemed impossible was beginning to feel inevitable, guided by a sense of duty and calling that transcended personal preference or ambition. The decision that would stun everyone was taking shape, formed not in a moment of dramatic revelation, but through weeks of careful consideration, prayer, and consultation with those she trusted most. The girl from Berkshire was discovering that she might indeed have the strength, wisdom, and dedication needed to wear the crown, not because she sought it, but because she recognized that in this unique moment in history, she might be exactly what the monarchy needed to secure its future and serve its people more effectively than ever before. December brought an unexpected sense of calm to Kate's deliberations. After weeks of intense consultation and soul-searching, she had reached a decision that felt both monumental and peaceful. The morning of December 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of winter sunlight that made London look particularly beautiful. Kate stood at the window of her apartment, watching the palace gardens where frost still clung to the bare branches, and knew that today would be the day she would give King Charles her answer. William had left early for an engagement in Scotland, but not before a private conversation that had lasted until dawn. They had talked through every aspect of their decision one final time, examining their choice from every possible angle. By the time the sun rose, they were both certain that they were making the right decision, not just for themselves, but for their children, for the monarchy, and for the future of the Commonwealth. Kate dressed carefully that morning, choosing a deep blue dress that had always made her feel confident and composed. As she prepared for what would be one of the most significant conversations of her life, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a university student who happened to catch the eye of a prince, to a princess who had gradually found her voice and purpose, to a woman who was about to accept the ultimate responsibility of constitutional monarchy. The walk through the palace corridors to King Charles's study felt different this time. Where 6 weeks ago she had approached this room with uncertainty and anxiety, today she moved with purpose and resolve. The portraits of past monarchs that lined the walls seemed to offer encouragement rather than intimidation, reminders of the long history of service that she was being invited to join. King Charles was waiting for her, seated behind the same mahogany desk where their first conversation had taken place. He looked up as she entered, and she could see both hope and apprehension in his eyes. This decision would affect him as much as it would affect her, representing either a vindication of his unprecedented choice or a rejection that would leave him questioning his judgment. "Catherine, thank you for coming," he said, standing to greet her. "I hope you found these weeks of consideration helpful, and I want you to know that whatever decision you've reached, I respect it completely." Kate took the same seat she had occupied during their first discussion, but this time she felt the weight of resolution rather than confusion. "Your Majesty, I want to begin by thanking you for the extraordinary trust you've shown in me. The fact that you believe I could serve the crown in this capacity is both humbling and inspiring." Charles nodded, waiting for her to continue. The room was perfectly quiet except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock that had marked so many important moments in royal history. "I have given this decision the most careful consideration of my life," Kate continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've consulted with family, with advisors, with spiritual counselors, and, most importantly, with my own conscience. I've examined the implications for William, for our children, for the monarchy, and for the people we serve." She paused, meeting Charles's eyes directly. "Your Majesty, I accept your offer. I am prepared to serve as your successor, and to dedicate my life to the duties and responsibilities of the crown." The words hung in the air between them, marking a moment that would be remembered in the history books for centuries to come. Charles's face showed a mixture of relief, pride, and profound emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both understanding that they had just changed the course of British constitutional history. "Catherine," Charles said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I cannot tell you how honored I am by your acceptance, or how confident I am that you will be an extraordinary sovereign. This decision required tremendous courage, and I believe history will vindicate the choice we're making today." They spent the next hour discussing the practical steps that would need to be taken. The constitutional process would be complex, requiring legislation in Parliament and consultations with all the Commonwealth realms. There would need to be careful coordination with the government, with the Church of England, and with the various royal households. Most challenging of all, there would need to be a delicate public relations strategy to help the British people and the world understand and accept this unprecedented change. "We'll need to move carefully but deliberately," Charles explained. "The announcement can't come as a complete shock to the public. We'll need to begin preparing the groundwork, perhaps through carefully placed stories about your expanding role, about the modern evolution of the monarchy. The actual announcement will probably be many months away, but the preparation needs to begin immediately. Kate nodded, understanding that she was now part of a complex historical process that would require patience, discretion, and careful planning. The decision had been made, but the path to actualizing it would be long and challenging. There's something else we need to discuss, Charles continued. Your title and the formal recognition of your new position. You would become Queen Catherine I, but we need to consider how to present this to maintain continuity while acknowledging the revolutionary nature of the change. The conversation turned to the ceremonial and symbolic aspects of the transition. Kate would need to be prepared for a coronation that would be both traditional and groundbreaking, honoring centuries of precedent while establishing new traditions for future monarchs. The regalia, the ceremony, the constitutional procedures would all need to be adapted for the unique circumstances of her accession. When Kate finally left the study, she felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. The decision was made, but now the real work would begin. She would need to prepare herself for responsibilities that no previous monarch had faced in quite the same way, while also maintaining her current duties and keeping the decision secret until the appropriate time for public announcement. Her first stop was to call William, who was between engagements in Edinburgh. His voice, when he answered, was tense with anticipation, and she could hear the question in his greeting before he even spoke. I said yes, she said simply. We're going to do this together. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds before William's voice came back, filled with love and pride. I'm so proud of you, Kate. So incredibly proud. You're going to be an amazing queen. Their conversation was brief due to William's schedule, but it was filled with the kind of emotional connection that had sustained them through 13 years of marriage and all the challenges of royal life. They would have much more to discuss when he returned to London that evening, but the most important communication had been accomplished. Kate's next call was to her parents, who had been anxiously waiting for her decision. Her mother answered on the first ring, and Kate could hear both parents on the line, clearly having been sitting together waiting for this call. Mom, Dad, I've made my decision, Kate said, settling into a comfortable chair in her private sitting room. I've accepted King Charles's offer. I'm going to be queen. The silence that followed was filled with so much emotion that Kate could feel it through the phone. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears of pride and concern. Oh, darling, Carol said. We're so incredibly proud of you. So honored that our daughter has been chosen for this extraordinary responsibility. But are you sure? Are you really ready for what this will mean? I'm sure, Mom, Kate replied. It's not a decision I've made lightly, but I believe it's the right one. I believe this is what I'm called to do. Michael Middleton's voice came on the line, characteristically practical even in this extraordinary moment. Kate, you know we'll support you in every way we can. But this changes everything for all of us. Are you prepared for that? Are the children prepared? Kate had anticipated this question and had thought carefully about the answer. Dad, we'll all need to adapt, and it won't be easy. But I think the children will ultimately benefit from seeing that service and duty can take many forms, and that sometimes we're called to accept responsibilities we never expected. The conversation with her parents lasted nearly an hour, covering everything from security arrangements to the impact on Pippa and James's lives. By the end, all three of them were crying, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening, but also filled with love and determination to face these challenges together. That evening, when William returned from Scotland, they sat together in their private apartment for what felt like the last time as the people they had been. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of transforming into something new, something unprecedented in royal history. Kate would begin the careful preparation for eventual queenship, while William would start adapting to a role that had no historical precedent. Do you think we're making the right choice for the children? Kate asked as they sat by the fire, holding hands in comfortable silence. William considered the question carefully before answering. I think we're showing them that service can take many forms and that sometimes the right choice isn't the expected choice. George has been raised to be king, but maybe this will give him the freedom to discover what kind of service truly calls to him. Charlotte and Louis will grow up seeing their mother as a powerful, independent leader, which might be the greatest gift we could give them. They talked long into the night about the practical implications of their choice. Kate would need to gradually transition into more significant royal duties, taking on engagements and responsibilities that would prepare her for eventual queenship. William would begin developing his role as future consort, a position that would allow him to focus on his passions while supporting Kate's broader responsibilities. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet but intensive preparation. Kate began working with constitutional experts to understand the full scope of sovereign duties. She met regularly with the cabinet secretary to learn about the monarch's role in government. She began studying Commonwealth affairs with an intensity that surprised even her closest advisors. Perhaps most importantly, she began the delicate process of expanding her public role in ways that would gradually prepare the British people for the eventual announcement. Her speeches became more substantial and wide-ranging. Her engagements took on greater significance. The media began to notice and comment on what appeared to be an evolution in the Princess of Wales's role within the royal family. By the spring of 2025, the groundwork had been carefully laid. Constitutional lawyers had drafted the necessary legislation. Commonwealth governments had been quietly consulted. The Church of England had been brought into the planning process. The stage was being set for an announcement that would indeed stun everyone, just as Charles had predicted. The decision had been made, accepted, and was slowly being implemented. The girl from Berkshire who had captured a prince's heart had evolved into a woman ready to wear the crown not through inheritance or marriage, but through merit, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to service. Kate's journey from commoner to future queen regnant would redefine not just her own life, but the very nature of the British monarchy. As she stood in the same palace gardens where she had contemplated this decision months earlier, Kate reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her to this moment. The choice that stunned everyone had been made, and while the road ahead would be challenging, she faced it with confidence, supported by a loving family and guided by a deep sense of purpose. The future Queen Catherine, I was ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to help the monarchy evolve for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century and beyond. The announcement, when it finally came, would indeed stun everyone. But for those who knew Kate best, who had watched her grow into her role over more than a decade of royal service, the choice would make perfect sense. The monarchy was changing, and Catherine was exactly the right person to guide it into its next chapter.